Time Stops Today by John Windman. I'm Mike Vendetti. A person waking should, in my opinion, glide smoothly back into coordination. Otherwise, he feels that there is some part of him that hasn't got back in time. And if there's another thing I dislike, it's the sharp drive of a woman's elbow. Well, come to that, anybody's elbow. Among the ribs, more particularly if that woman happens to be my wife. After all, it's part of a wife's job to learn not to do these things. In the circumstances, my response came clear out of the subconscious. "Well, really," said Sylvia. "I know I'm only your wife, George, but, well, really—" My time lag caught up. "Sorry," I said, "but damn it, what's the matter anyway?" "I don't know," Sylvia admitted, "but I've got a feeling that there's something wrong." "Oh, Lord," I said, and switched on the light. Naturally, everything looked just as usual. "Intuition," I suggested. "You needn't sneer at me, George. What about that Sunday I knew we were going to have an accident with the car?" "Which Sunday? There were so many." "Why, the Sunday we did have one, of course. I felt just the same way about it as I do now." I sat up in bed. The clock had been a wedding present. After a while I calculated that it was trying to indicate 3:15 a.m. I listened. I couldn't hear anything, any place. Still, you know what intuition is. "I suppose I'd better have a look." "Where did you think it was?" I asked her. "What was?" "Whatever you heard." "But I didn't hear anything. I told you. It's just a feeling that something's wrong." I relaxed and leaned back on the pillow. Would I do something about that? "What can you do? It's just a feeling." "Then why on earth—" I began. At that moment the light went out. "There," said Sylvia triumphantly. "I knew." "Good. Well, that's over then." I pulled up the bedclothes. "Aren't you going to look at it?" she inquired. "A blown fuse can keep till morning, even if you'd not left my torch someplace," I told her. "But it may not be a fuse." "To hell with it," I muttered, getting comfortable again. "I should have thought you'd want to know," she suggested. "I don't. I just want to sleep." When I woke again, the morning was nice and bright. The sun was shining in and painting a part of the opposite wall with a pale gold. Stretched a bit in warm comfort and reached for a cigarette. As I lit it, I remembered the light. Pushed the switch on and off a few times without result. That cute electric clock seemed to be saying 3:15. My watch said 7 o'clock. I lay back, enjoying the first few puffs at the cigarette. Sylvia slept on. I allowed the temptation to drive my elbow into her ribs for a change to pass. She manages such a decorative and confiding appearance when she sleeps. Just then she said, "Ugh," and pulled the sheet over her ear. She is not one who greets the dawn with a glad cry. At about the same moment it occurred to me that there was something wrong with the day. A sort of background buzz of traffic from the main road, an occasional car in our own road, milk bottle clinking, and a feel of general sense of stir. This morning all that was missing. Even the bird sounds. A disturbing air of peace lay over the neighborhood. The more I listened, the more unnatural it seemed. At length it drove me to get up and go to the window. Behind me Sylvia said, "Hell," and pulled the bedclothes more closely round her. I think I must have stood looking out of the window for several minutes before I turned back. Then I said, "Sylvia, there's something funny been happening." "Oh," she remarked. Dropping the understatement, I continued, "Look, if you don't see it too, I must be going crazy." The tone of my voice got through to her. She opened her eyes. "What is it?" "Come and look," I repeated. She yawned, pushed back the covers, and maneuvered off the bed. She thrust her feet into a pair of mules decorated for some inconceivable feminine reason with feathers, and pulled on her wrap as she staggered across. "What?" she began, Then she shut up and stood staring. We live in a suburb. It's a nice suburb. Nice sort of people. The houses are pretty much alike, all with their garages and gardens. Not large houses, not large gardens either, though quite large enough for the husbands to look after. We stand on a slope, and from the bedroom window we look down upon the backs of a similar row of houses which front upon a road parallel to ours, and have gardens running up toward us. The end of our garden is separated from the end of the one opposite by a high wooden fence, which is continuous along all the properties. Across the roofs of the opposite houses we can see the huddle of more industrial parts beyond. On fine days we can see a considerable distance further to low hills, where houses similar to our own stand out among trees and gardens. But more often the two residential areas are hidden from one another by the haze thickened with smoke that rises between them. It is not perhaps an inspiring view across the tall chimneys, municipal towers, and the beetle-backs of several movie houses, but it does give us a sense of space and a big stretch of sky. The trouble with it this morning was that it gives us little else. Just beneath us lay our lawn and flower beds, then the hedge which cuts off the vegetable garden, where the rows of beans, peas, and cabbages should have run down past a pear tree on the left and a plum tree on the right, until they reached the raspberry and currant department. But they didn't. They began, but about halfway down their proper length they just stopped. Beyond that abrupt edge there was a brown, sandy-looking soil in which a coarse grass grew in large and small patches and lonely tufts. It was duneland, save that it lacked any noticeable hillocks. It stretched on and on, undulating gently into the distance, until it met brownish-green hills far away. We stared out at it in silence for some little time. Then Sylvia said in a choked voice, "Is this some kind of joke, George?" Sylvia has two reactions to any sort of unpleasant surprise. One is that if it utterly fails to amuse her, it must be some form of joke. And the other is, whatever it concerns, I must be responsible for it somehow. I do not pretend to know what she thought I might have been doing in order to spirit away the whole landscape, but I was able to reply with truth that no one could be more surprised than I. Whereupon she gave a kind of gulp and ran out of the room. I stood there. I was still looking out. On the left was Sagetti's garden, running down alongside our own, and cut off in the same peculiar way. Beyond that was the Drurys', at least part of theirs. Not only was it cut off on a line with ours, but there was no more than a 6-foot wide strip of it to be seen. Beyond was the sandy soil. Sylvia came back looking frightened. "The same in front," she said. "The garden's there, and half the width of the sidewalk. Then there's just that stuff, and half the garage is gone." I raised the window sash and looked out to the right. From that angle I could look down on the garage roof. It looked usual enough. Then I saw what she meant. "It's half the gunner's garage that's gone," I said. And it had. The roof of their garage climbed to within an inch or two of the ridge, then stopped as if it had been sliced clean off. Where the rest of it should have been, and where the gunner's house should have been, tussocks of grass waved in a light wind. "Thank goodness," said Sylvia, not uncharitably. "You understand, but after all, we had only had our new convertible a couple of weeks." "I must be dreaming," I said, a little shakily. "We can't both be," she objected. That, of course, was debatable, but this was scarcely the moment, so I said, "Well, am I dreaming you, or are you dreaming me?" I let her have it. I ought to have known better than to ask the question in the first place. I hurried on some clothes and went outside to see what I could make of it. The front was just as Sylvia had said. I walked down the path, opened the gate, and stepped out to the half-width of sidewalk. The edge where the sandy soil began looked just as if it had been trimmed off with a sharp knife. I bent over to look at it more closely, and caught myself a sharp crack on the head. It was so unexpected that I recoiled slightly. Then I put up a hand to see what had done it. My fingers met a smooth surface which was neither hot nor cold, and seemed as solid as rock. I raised the other hand and felt across several square feet of it. It scared me a bit because, though it was unfamiliar, it was only a step on from the quite familiar. One just had to imagine plate glass with a perfectly non-reflecting surface. I could not, though, the sandy soil and grass beyond. The transparent wall rose from the very line where normal things ended. As I stood there looking through it, I noticed an odd thing. The glass beyond was waving, yet I could not feel even a stir of air around me. After a moment's thought, I went to the garage. There I chose my heaviest hammer and found an old can half full of sludgy kerosene. Outside again, I threw the contents of the can at the transparent wall. It was queer the way the stuff splattered suddenly in mid-air and began to trickle down. Then I took a grip on the hammer and hit hard. The thing rebounded, and the shaft stung my fingers so that I dropped it. There was no other perceptible result. When I investigated at the back of the house, I found the same invisible barrier terminated what remained of the garden, and with increased bizarre effect, for there it appeared to bisect the plum tree so that, seen from as nearly to the side as I could get, the whole trunk and spread was flat-backed, like a piece of stage scenery. I wished I could crane around to see what the devil it looked like from the back, but the wall itself prevented that. In a rough survey, I estimated that the area of normalcy enclosed by these walls could be an approximate square of 70 yards. Beyond this, in all directions, stretched the featureless dunes. Featureless, that is, save for the hills in the distance, which occupied just the same position